ladies and gentlemen, dear participants, the major lecture for today is not my little thing on culture and translation and professional education, which has been a very, very interesting subject for me for a long time. So I thought I'd do it today again. The major talk will be given by Professor Hammouda Salhi, a very good friend of mine. I can call him Hammouda. He is professor, researcher, senior interpreter, Arabic, English, and French. She has more languages than me. Dr. Salhi is the director of the master's program in translation and interpreting at the University of Tunis El Manar. He's also founder and organizer of the first conference on translation and interpreting, New Voices on the Marketplace. He has many publications in the area of translation and cross-cultural communication, interpreting, and he has taken part in very many conferences worldwide. That's why he's going to talk about travel, because he traveled so much, obviously, right? If I may interject this. He has extensive professional experience, and after my little talk, we know what professionalism is, as a conference interpreter, translator, language consultant in the areas of law, business, security, documentary, creative writing, diplomacy, administration, cross-cultural matters and communication. Wow, can I only say. He has successfully serviced thousands of meetings, workshops, and conferences as an international interpreter in almost 46 countries and 440 cities and villages. He acted as interpreting consultant, team leader, chief interpreter, coordinating and chairing teams of interpreters for many different organizations and clients. And this is sort of in black here in my little script, he has interpreted for high-profile world leaders, such as former and current UN Secretaries General Ban Ki-moon and Antonio Guterres, and current Russian President Vladimir Putin, in relay, of course, because you don't speak Russian, I guess.
Yes.
Okay. Dr. Salhi is also accredited in several international institutions, for instance, United Nations, World Bank, etc., etc. Anyway, he's also serving as on the editorial board of many journals, but I think we know now that he is a very important, very experienced, and very professional person, right? And I will stop my eulogy now and hand over to you, Hammouda.
Thank you very much, dear Juliana, for this introduction. And first of all, I would like to say that it is an honor for me to be able or to be introduced by such a distinguished scholar and be able to share this online stage with her and with other distinguished colleagues, scholars, and very professional translators and interpreters, and also very good students. So I am addressing a group with a diversity in a way, more experienced, less experienced. So I will try to strike a balance in the messages that I'm going to send out, to strike a balance between the audiences, I would say. At the outset, I should make a confession. I fell into a rabbit hole and prepared stuff for 2 or 3 lectures instead of 1. So I'm going to speed up a little bit through the items that I have prepared, and I will summarize some of the others, and perhaps will leave some other items and questions to the discussion. And maybe I will be writing them in a paper, and the ideas might seem then more coherent when you read the paper. These encounters were designed to have fresh insights into the translational and interpreting exercises through the prism of practicing translators and interpreters when they share their stories, their professional life, which I'm going to do also today, because I have so many, as Juliana has kindly introduced me. I have 4 backgrounds. A common factor among them is translation. I am a translation researcher, translation professor, practicing translator, and practicing interpreter, conference interpreter. So I'm going to use these 4 backgrounds together. Of course, the other encounters are having that fresh insights through the lenses of experts or researchers in translation, or through the lenses of experts from neighboring disciplines such as philosophy, art, literature, and when they present their approaches to translation. So in this talk, I'm going to comment, and here I insist on the word comment, on the conceptual interrelationships or interrelationship of travel and interpreting through both perspectives, as I said earlier, sharing my story as a practicing interpreter and sharing also my modest and humble views as a translation researcher. And of course, I don't claim to be setting out models like Professor House did. So I'm just investigating very narrow windows in translation. I'm going to share now my screen, and then to stop sharing it, because I have something to show you before I start the presentation. Can you see my screen?
Oh yes, but I see all the participants on the right hand side. Does it matter? No.
Yeah, no problem.
It doesn't matter. No problem.
Can you see it now?
Okay. Yeah, very good.
By showing hands, please. Thank you. So I entitled my presentation "Travel and Interpreting: A Journey into the Multiple Worlds or Words and Journeys of Interpreters." And I'm going to share with you the structure. So this is the structure of my talk. I'm going to speak about word roots, the roots of things, persons, and basically words, because words, like human beings, they have roots, they develop over time, and identity and experience. So identity and experience, basically related to the profile of an interpreter. And then I'm going to specify or devote a sort of paragraph on identity and belonging. Then word roots, basically 3 or 4 words. And then interpreters are the new nomads or people on the move. Then I will share a personal story. In a creative writing I have written, I'm still writing, so I will have an extract from it, 2 or 3 paragraphs, perhaps I will read. Then I will investigate travel as an interpreting act, the omnipresence of the interpreter, the image of the interpreter, how the interpreter is being seen by different parties, and then thoughtful travel for interpreters and how it is helpful to, and how it is really a source of knowledge for interpreters. Then interpreting and the multiple journeys. There are multiple journeys in the overall travel: linguistic and pragmatic journey or journeys, physical and logistical journeys, psychological and mental journeys, cultural journeys, and I'm not going to spend much time in these journeys because you know them all, and I am lucky that I am speaking after Professor House, because she laid the foundation or the context, I would say, for cultural journeys, but I will see it from a little bit different perspective, and then I will conclude. But before that, I'm going to show some pictures as part of photography. Photography is one of my hobbies, and perhaps I learned it from interpreting when I started translating some workshops on photography for professional photographers and how to take a professional picture. It's not a matter of luck, but how to, when a viewer sees a picture, can safely say that this is a professional picture, not by way of capturing it by luck, for example, sunset or sunrise. So on my travels, I started to practice this hobby, But these are shots of interviews and encounters with people who have inspired me and have impacted my professional life, personal life, and so on. But I'm going just to flash on them very quickly, and then in the presentation of the talk, you will understand why I am displaying them. So first of all, this is the Court of Justice, the European Court of Justice.
Impressive.
And I would like to invite you to see the booths over there, 28 booths. And because I'm going to share with you a story on that. These are the booths. Then this is at the shores of the Congo River. So Cindy from the Congo Brazzaville and her children. This is Cindy, as you can see her. And this is Sufi.
Oh yes, now I see her. Yeah, but this is like, oh.
So this is the Sufi. Dervish. I have interviewed a Dervish. Yes, and I'm going to share a story from Turkey, from Istanbul, and I know that there is someone from Turkey following this. And this one is in Ethiopia, giving a hand up to a woman, a bush woman. Then a conversation, an encounter with a priest, a Hindu priest, and then giving hand to some ladies doing farming in Indonesia, in the island of Sulawesi. And then this is a room in the Peace Palace in The Hague that is home to the International Court of Justice. And I was interpreting there, and there was an incident happened, so I'm going to share this story also with you. And this is the president of the European Court of Justice, and I have interviewed him also, and I'm going to share some audio with you on translation terminology. So,
very good pictures, Hammouda.
Thank you.
And particular in Corona times where we are not allowed to travel, this is very nice to see that.
And this is a ride on the mountains of Mongolia. And then, okay. So I'm going to go back and to stop sharing this.
I think now it's stopped.
Yes, it stopped.
Yes. Thank you very much. Thank you for your help. Thank you. We are all learning, Juliana. We are all learning.
Thank you very much. Not only me being an elderly woman.
Now that you have seen the structure of my talk, I'm going to address the question of word roots, the identity and experience of the interpreter. In an interpreted encounter, the interpreter is often belonging by birth and education to one of the many cultures in the room, in the conference room. He promptly switches between the source and the target poles of communication and cultures in order to ensure mutual understanding despite individual cultural differences. I am Tunisian by birth and education. More particularly, I am from the central part of Tunisia, and I started interpreting for my mother, whom I interviewed and recorded on several occasions. And by the way, I am always having fantastic encounters with her. I always take advantage of her presence when I am not away to interview her. She is in turn, in those encounters, interpreting to me past stories and perhaps past narratives about local culture, identity, and also national events, mostly related to the resistance movement. Or the Falaga movement, which is these are the independence fighters against the French occupation, as experienced, of course, by her forefathers and my forefathers. One of my future plans, by the way, to translate these narratives into English. She used to tell me that our forefathers used to lead nomad-like lives. they were seasonal nomads, and she's always teasing me, by the way, saying that I am the son of two journeys. A summer journey to the land of harvesting in Ifriqiya, in the northwest of Tunisia, which is a region, a cereal producing region, and a winter journey to dates harvesting in Al Jarid region in the southwest of Tunisia. You know, when you are hearing these narratives from person as close as your mother, you will be fascinated more, because this is related to your identity by the idea of travel. And you get into the philosophy of travel, discussing it even with yourself. So in these two journeys, my mother kept on saying, a whole heritage of stories, poems, and songs have been created. These two journeys form their travels. Travel in Arabic is safar. So let me now examine very briefly the etymological or the etymology of the three words: safar in Arabic, journey in English, and translation in English. I found out that an etymological link between travel, knowledge, experience, and translation is very strong. And first, safar and its derivations, as found in the two dictionaries, Al-Qamus Al-Muhit and Lisan al-Arab dictionaries. First meaning, safara shay'u wadaha wa inkashafa, means things become clearer, visible, and obvious. سفر الصبح أي أضاء وأشرق رويدا رويدا, means the dawn breaking gently. السفر is another derivation, which means the book or the great book, الكتاب الكبير, book of knowledge, or a masterpiece in the sense. So safara, travel, is also the root for knowledge and for experience compiled in a book. And from safar also we find asfar, and the plural of sifr, like asfar Musa, which are the revelations to Moses, the Torah, which are 5 books, I think. And also a sifara, embassy. Sifara is from also safar. So embassy comes from Middle French. Embassy means the mission of a group of persons sent out to a foreign country to conduct negotiations and establish relations, exactly like interpreters. Interpreters have often been portrayed as negotiators and mediators. So a large number of translation scholars have remarked on the etymological link between translation and travel, exemplified by the Latin root translatio, or traditio in French, which both imply movement, transportation, displacement, and travel, both on a physical and on a metaphorical level, or journeys. Experience is one of the interesting words for both travelers and interpreters, because it is a necessary condition. Both travelers and interpreters, they need experience. Eric Leeds, in his book in The Mind of the Traveler, published in 1991, page 5, examined the Indo-European root of experience, which is P-E-R, which is to travel. This route illustrates and intuitively the connection between experience and travel. John Locke identified in experience the primary constituent of personal identity. He pointed to the role of travel in the shaping of personhood. Interpreters are also the new nomads. They are people on the move. And the relationship between travel and interpreting might be compressed as to the traveling interpreters, as professionals moving from one hub to another, or from one country to another, or city. But the relationship involves a much more complex pattern of representations, interferences, images, readings, and even cultural and linguistic journeys and transfers. And these points will be explained shortly in the second part of this talk. So interpreting can then be seen as a complex practice involved in the construction of images and identities, whether these images and identities are individual or collective, and in the interaction between cultures. Travel, in that sense, is not only a form of regular and normal movement, it can safely and genuinely be presented as a form of interpreting. Travel as a form of interpreting. Here is a personal story, my personal story, on the interconnection and mutual interdependence between travel and interpreting, despite the fact that it is part of a creative piece of writing, as I said earlier, and that it, like this talk, depicts a mix of both physical and metaphorical journeys, and perhaps spiritual journeys. Personal story. The beginning of the extract. Stargazing, the journey to the stars. My spiritual and translational journey started on the rooftop of our old rural house in the central part of Tunisia, during one bright summer night, a perfect night for stargazing. My mother, again the presence of my mother, or my identity. My mother had already spread out colorful blankets and pillows. Before the night sank over that small rural house and the blankets, the sun had already shone for those blankets, and they avidly drank in its rays to offer me later in the night a spiritual banquet for a meditative silence, or a romantic conversation with the stars, the moon, and perhaps with the flashing lights of high altitude aircrafts going from Europe to sub-Saharan Africa or Australia, crossing that twinkling night sky. No camera or technology, photography again. No camera or technology. And by the way, I see photography as an act of interpreting, taking a shot and displaying it or transferring it to another audience in a different setting is a form of interpreting. So no camera or technology was there to capture the moment, or rather to translate the stars and the constellations, except for one memory, two eyes, and multiple dreams. One of my greatest dreams was to start a real-life journey in which the physical world would be explored as a next step following the spiritual exploration of the astronomical world. Here again, there is another world for the interpreter, which is the astronomical world. The second mission was even more difficult than the first, as 90 talks with and about the stars flowed freely and smoothly like a river flowing down from the mountains. And I'm going to tell you stories also about the mountains. No need to know another foreign language, or more precisely, no need to be an interpreter to translate far-flung worlds to a local and physical world. The language of dream was more than enough. The physical and spiritual journey. Born and raised in Tunisia and educated in Tunis and Manchester, my life journey, the road to meaning, and the map of translation have all led me travel the distance to the moon and back in my visits to more than 46 countries, as mentioned by Juliana early on, and to more than 400 cities and many more small towns and villages. Over the years, I started to find ways to translate my global passions to local needs and perhaps professional hobbies. Language is one of those hobbies, and this led me to the more cutting-edge passion for photographic imaging, as well as meaning making by interpretation, أي بالتأويل, or meaning milking by inferencing, أي بالاستدلال والاستنباط. So those passions dragged me. Those passions dragged me to another stream in the main journey, in which I started to think globally and interpret locally. Travel has taught me the reality of meaning and the true meaning of words and expressions, such as the word of homelessness. Having a short having a short yet rich conversation with a proud and noble lady like Cindy and her children, seen earlier in the picture, in the Congo Brazzaville at the shores of the Congo River, does more to comprehend and humanize the reality of poverty than reading a library of great books on the subject. This also inspired me to properly interpret emotions and get the human being to other people. And I don't like to say access, but to read the human side in any speaker and transferring this to target audience. End of the extract. So it is argued in this talk that travel can be an inspiring exercise and can be made as an interpreting act if it is exercised as thoughtful travel. So I'm trying to discuss with you now the omnipresence of interpreting agents and show how encounters, even normal encounters, can also be encounters, inspiring encounters, and also some other encounters as encounters of control and hegemony. So thoughtful travel as an interpreting act. And the omnipresence of the interpreter. In principle, all travel, at least all travel into other countries and other cultures, all travel implies literally some form of interpreting. In most cases, this means that the traveler has to seek possible ways of communicating with local people. I am always seeking to engage and engage very closely with the locals and communicate with them who most of the time do not speak the same language, such as a bush woman high in the mountains of Addis Ababa, seen in the picture, or worshippers in a Buddhist shrine high in the mountains of Mongolia, seen in the picture, or having a very nice and pleasant conversation with 3 female farmers on the Indonesian island of North Sulawesi. So throughout the centuries, translators and interpreters have often been portrayed as explorers, discoverers, and even smugglers of riches across borders. Interpreters always strive to meticulously and faithfully transfer the reality, render the reality or the words they interpret. In this rendering of events, places, peoples, and narratives, the interpreting act takes place. So, or the noble interpreting act. So the interpreter presence is always crucial for the traveler in need of translation, whether in the form of a more experienced traveling companion or more often that of an educated local. A frequent instance of lost in translation or communication issue is, for example, when you are abroad and in a small town and not everyone speaks English or the languages you know over there, and you wish to have a strong coffee before a talk like this. Strong coffee before a talk you wish to give, and the waiter does not understand exactly what you like. So what happens in this case? Another client or the colleague of that waiter will almost certainly step in to interpret your wish. This is exactly what happened to me when I was in Maribor so many years ago, when 2 twin sisters jumped in to make my point through in Slovene language. So the image of the interpreter. Let's move now to another journey of the explorers and colonizers. Perhaps we move now to the dark side of the encounters, the dark side of the work of interpreters. Local interpreters played a key role in exploration and colonization. This is a reality. So in Western colonization, Western colonial powers either recruited Westerners who had extensive contact with the locals to act as interpreters. However, most of the time it was the locals who had been forced to act as interpreters by means of kidnapping or enforced acculturation and bilingualism or biculturalism. So an example of that would be, a very good example of that, I think, would be the example of les Pères Blancs in Tunisia, white fathers. These were missionaries sent to Africa. The first missions to Tunisia took place in 1875. And later these white fathers included some Arab missionaries from the Levant, the Great Syria, and the French colonial power shared with them the same Christian faith. So the French could use some of them as interpreters between the French soldiers on the one hand and the Tunisian locals on the other. In these mediated encounters, the local laymen had no direct contact with the foreign language, with the French, except through the prism and the tongues of the Syrian interpreters. That's why there are some narratives explaining why Tunisians are still calling the French language Suri, means Syrian, from Syria. We say in Tunisian Arabic, Yahki Suri. Means speaking French. The Syrian was mistakenly taken as a foreign language, because sometimes the Syrian interpreters, when they would like to share something with with the French soldiers or with the other Syrians, they started to speak in French, and they thought that the Tunisian locals, they thought that this was their language. Then the word Suri started to accommodate all other connotations related to modernity and modern lifestyle. Anything coming from France would be called Suri. So we say Libsa Suri or Libsa Arabi, means way of clothing that is modern and that is traditional. Even now we call the normal shirt, Surya. It is coming from France, but it is called Surya for Syrian. But in general terms, perhaps this does not apply to the white fathers or les pères blancs. The role of the locals, in particular, has been very questionable and subject to substantial doubt and suspicion. The interpreters are allied and yet potential enemies to both the colonizers and the colonized. That's why the interpreter's image has always been tainted with much mistrust and suspicion by either or both foreigners and locals. Interpreters also share so many common denominators with tour guides. They share so many things in common, and I know personally a large number of tour guides who, after the collapse of the tourism sector and tourism income due to terrorism in Tunisia and elsewhere, they started a new career as conference interpreters. So interpreters, like tour guides, can sometimes be accused of petty offenses, as in the many allegations of guides accused of conspiring with greedy shop owners to persuade less experienced traveling visitors or naive visitors to pay exaggerated prices. The climate has impacted very positively entire cultures, and you are going to see how this impact has been portrayed and has taken shape. I will tell you a personal story to describe the life-altering effects of travel and to explain how to have the kind of journey that will indeed change your life. And here I'm sending my message primarily to students and novice interpreters, because I know that large number of interpreters, some of them are present here, and I can mention Professor Mansouri, Sami, Mirvet, and so on, live out of their suitcases. So throughout travel, people can gain experience, and when travelers and interpreters can make it to the so-called thoughtful travel, they can gain a lot. So thoughtful travel is well worth the time, the fatigue, the jet lag, and even the loss of money in case of extended stays or missed flights. Just like travelers, through their interpreters are cutting new paths in the wilderness. And travel opens up to the wonders of the world. It helps you appreciate nature and people. For me, it's a great day walking high in the mountains of Mongolia with a local interpreter, a guide from the Ministry of Defense, telling me the story, and I still remember now that story with the pictures I have, and you have seen one of them early on. So telling me the story of the mountains and the supernatural forces of those mountains, and taking all the way to the top Buddhist temple. Travel and encounters like that, and encounters with an inspiring Hindu priest can connect you with the nature, with the culture, and so on. On a business trip to Istanbul, I attended a whirling dervish ceremony, photo number 2, I think. One dervish kindly accepted to spend some time after the ceremony to have a conversation on their fascinating Sufi order. He explained their ritual in the following manner, quote, "When we start the meditative dance, we start our spiritual journey towards knowledge. We start having our arms crossed like that, a gesture representing the unity of God. We keep one foot on the left fixed on the floor, representing our presence in our physical world, anchored in our societies and communities. The right foot spins around and around, embracing the beauty of God's creation in all over the world. A very good and powerful message of tolerance. I raise one hand up to acknowledge the love of God, and the other hand goes down like the spout of a teapot. As I spin around, my hand above receives the love from our Creator, and my hand below showers it onto all His creation." So this conversation inspired me to continue the search for the balance I wish to strike as a traveling interpreter between the global and the local, between the self and the other, and between the source language culture and the target language culture. Traveling interpreters use their journeys to have enlightening linguistic and cultural experiences. To meet inspirational people and interpret the seemingly unusual perspectives to non-locals, and interpreting one's own thoughts and views to locals, and mediate between competing ideologies. And suddenly the palette with which we paint an interpreted event has more colors. The traveler must always interpret the acts and utterances of the locals in order to make sense of foreign places and foreign people and enjoy the games of different perspectives. It's a very nice game, an enjoyable game. And here I wish to share with you a funny story from Arabic literature about Juha. And I know that Arab participants here know Juha quite well. A story about seeing things from our own perspective. There is a character in the Arabic literature, as I said, called Juha. He's a comical but a wise character. Once he was on the side of a river bank, a wide river bank, and I think the story took place in Iraq. A man came to the other bank. He was on a travel. A man came to the other bank of the river and shouted over to him, "How do I get across to the other side?" And Juha replied, "You are already across the other side." So we experience otherness when we come into contact with the unfamiliar. It is the feeling that things are different. And my favorite books are those written by Ibn Battuta in his journey, and Ibn Khaldun. And Ibn Khaldun has written Al-Muqaddimah, introduction, and lay the foundation for a whole branch of knowledge that is sociology, out of his observations in his journeys, in addition to knowledge that I could acquire from documentaries describing far-flung places, and even close places. Now, the difference between regular or normal journeys, and I would use the term interpreter journeys, is not a matter of distance. I think the difference between regular journeys and interpreter journeys lies on how much otherness is present and how much otherness the traveler experiences, and how much interpreting has taken place from and into the traveler. Regular experiences or regular journeys involve just a little, whereas interpreter journeys involve a lot of that. So what's the difference between a trip to a local conference here in Gamart, which is a tourist resort in Tunis, and a trip to places as far as Baku, Azerbaijan, Jakarta, Indonesia, or Addis Ababa, Africa, or The Hague, Europe? And why some interpreters find it more challenging to service a conference abroad with the same topic, with the same participants, as one taking place in their own country? So this is really a genuine question to ask. So let's move now to interpreting and the multiple journeys. First, linguistic and pragmatic journey. Cross-linguistic journeys, that means the language combinations, the travel from one language to another, or from one structure to another, from one world to another. And the greater the distance between cultures, the greater the interpreter's mediating effort, both linguistic and cultural. And I know that Professor Mohammed Mansouri has addressed this subject on unrelatedness between languages, the difficulties and the challenges. This also requires certain linguistic effort, because languages display different patterns with respect to morphology and syntax and semantic equivalence. Even when they belong to the same family, linguistic family, there is always this effort. So different languages may pose some challenge, in the sense that for interpreters, of course, because the structure is important. You have to start with something. Like in Arabic, the structure of the sentence is VSO, verb, subject, object. While English and French, for example, and other Indo-European languages, the structure is SVO, subject, verb, object. So the greater the asymmetry between languages, the greater the language surface rearrangement and consequent cognitive load will be during the interpreter's performance. There is also another journey, which is a cross-field journey. Interpreters travel from one field to another. One day they might be translating or interpreting a conference on law, and there are even subfields within law, such as commercial law, the family law, and so on, the terrorism, counter-terrorism law, and so on. And one other day will be interpreting a conference or a meeting in agriculture, fisheries, for example, or pastoralists. Another day or another conference, they will be interpreting banking staff, and so on and so forth. So these are also journeys. The other item under this journey, linguistic and pragmatic journey, is also synonymy. And synonymy, there is another issue here, because novice interpreters and translators, they take certain words as synonymous, and I really don't believe that there is synonymy, or at least full synonymy. In a conference, the interpreter can come across two seemingly synonymous terms, such as assistance and aid. Two simple and recurrent, let's say, phrases. like legal aid and mutual legal assistance. Mutual legal assistance, or MLA, in criminal matters, for example, is a process by which states and central authorities in particular seek for and provide assistance to other states in servicing of judicial document and gathering evidence for use in criminal cases. This is not the legal aid. Legal aid, on the other hand, is an aid provided by an organization like the state or the Ministry of Justice, especially to serve the legal needs of the poor. So these are two different terms, and it is really very important to make that distinction in the Arabic language. And I have noticed that most interpreters render both phrases as al-musa'ada, musa'ada here and musa'ada there, in the same conference. That might be confusing. Al-musa'ada al-qanuniyya al-mutabadala and al-musa'ada al-qanuniyya. I would rather suggest musa'ada for assistance and ma'una for aid. Legal aid is al-ma'una, and ma'una is al-aun, more for the poor. It goes with the idea of the poor and the needy, in addition to so many other phrases and terms that might look similar, but they are not, like task force, working group. We can suggest different terms in Arabic as well. Words do travel also. How do words travel? Polysemy and complementary polysemy in particular is a structure to show how do words travel. They start with core meanings, أو المعنى النووي in Arabic, core meaning that is present in all the occurrences of that word or phrase. The core meaning travels with that word in all of its occurrences. So it is very important for the interpreter or the translator to be a linguist also, and to take that journey and to follow that journey, the journey of the word. I will give you one example because you need to understand the context to have access to the intended meaning of the speaker, and each speaker has his own intentions, his own way of using words. So that's why it is not random, but we need to understand and to have access to that, and knowing the speaker will make your task much easier. The example, I can take one example from Antonio Guterres, the Secretary General of the United Nations. I would like to take one example from a speech he has given in a conference which took place in Marrakesh 2019 on the Migration Compact, which is an agreement between states. He said, quote, "But there have been many falsehoods about the agreement and the overall issue of migration. So let me begin by dispelling a few myths." Myth number one. Here I would like to highlight myth. The compact will allow the United Nations to impose migration policies on member states, infringing on their sovereignty. False. And he said false. This is the other term I would like to comment on. Myth and false. So myth in Arabic would be translated literally in the core meaning as ostura or something not real. But I think we can go the extra mile and have access to the intended meaning, and by reading the context, reading the speaker, I think he is also in this same statement, the discourse of Mr. Guterres, is also putting the blame on some states for disseminating that narrative. So myth here, I would not translate it as أسطورة, but rather as مغالطة. And false would not be غلط or خطأ, because there is also the element or the meaning of holding states and perhaps other parties accountable for that. It is افتراء. الافتراء. In addition to some other terms like qada, for example, it displays so many meanings. And I have carried out a study on the adjective good, and they have found that it displays 27 equivalents in Arabic. Good because depending on the noun it pre-modifies. Qada, for example, is to predestine or to decree. When I say, for example, قضى الله عز وجل, or قضى بالعدل, to judge in this context. قضى الغرض, to accomplish a task. قضى العهد means to carry out or implement. قضى حاجته, to urinate. Simply, and so on and so forth. So words do travel, as I said, and we have to understand that within the context. This is experience now with knowledge. The knowledge is like the core meaning, but also you need to travel with the word where it goes. You have to have a very clear idea about what might be meant in that particular context. I'll give you an example. I've served some training courses for the law enforcement agencies here in Tunisia, basically on crowd management, and there is a term used in this context, interpreted event, which is missiles or missiles, depending on the pronunciation, British or American. And missiles in that context is not the rockets, but rather anything that can be thrown onto the police officers and the shields. So missiles here is not قذائف, means rockets, like one interpreter has said once, but rather المقذوفات, anything that can be thrown, like pieces of stone or bottles and so on. There is another term which is intifada. I remember I was servicing a conference in for the Sudanese opposition before the toppling of President Omar al-Bashir, and the participants there were using the term intifada. And intifada, it is an Arabic word that found its way into English, which means an armed uprising, basically of Palestinians against Israeli occupation of the West Bank and Gaza Strip. The Sudanese were using intifada, and the interpreters were rendering it into either intifada or into uprising. Uprising is for the English speakers, especially the Americans, is something armed. So the element of violence is there, but it does not necessarily include the element of violence as it is uttered. But here you need to work to tailor the meaning to match the intended meaning for the target audience. And one of the clients, who is an English speaker, approached the interpreters during the coffee break and told them, please don't use the word intifada or uprising anymore. And she has expressed the concern of the donor parties that they might be accused of funding an armed uprising or funding violence. So here the interpreters changed later the term and translated it something like peaceful protest, or protest like that for intifada. Terminology is another issue, and makes interpreters take different journeys depending on who is speaking and to whom he is speaking. I can give you one example, a very simple example, like inmate or inmates. If it is uttered by the prison administration, it would be al-mudaun here in Tunisia, means people sent to correctional facilities. So the sending, uda, deposit. It's literally, this is the meaning. But for human rights activists, these are prisoners, war prisoners, or political prisoners. So these are prisoners. Even the word prison can be used, the same concept can be expressed in a way to match the speaker or the audience. If it is uttered by a prison authority, between inverted commas, it would be correctional facilities and rehabilitation centers. But if it is uttered by a victim who has been submitted or subjected to human rights violations, it will be prison and nothing but prison. In addition to the sequence or the system of justice and courts, and how a person starts to be a suspect, then accused, then convicted, and so on. Other examples like response team. We فرق التدخل in Tunisia. تدخل means it's not intervention teams or team, but response. Or engaging the target, for example. When you say engaging the target, it means to kill the target by a law enforcement agent. So they use the term to engage the target, and you have to understand that engaging means just to kill. You need to understand also the system of positions in shooting positions, for example, standing, وضع الوقوف, kneeling, وضع الركوع, and prone position, الانبطاح, and so on and so forth. And also you need to take into account the context when choosing one term over another. For example, in a gun like M4 gun, there is the front sight and the rear sight. The front sight, for example, in Arabic, is al-mihdaf al-amami and then al-mihdaf al-khalfi. These are very awkward words to be used nowadays, especially for Tunisian law enforcement agencies, because they are used to and familiar with different terms. So the interpreter has to do some search and some investigation over the terms and the jargon that is being used by that institution or that agency. And I always try my best to have a fruitful conversation with the agency to which I am interpreting, to get the proper and the most appropriate terms. We say in Arabic, وَخَاطِبِ الْقَوْمَ بِمَا يَفْهَمُونَ. So this is the communicative purpose, means to use the same language and the language or the jargon that is being used to make the communication successful. So in addition to the pragmatic journey, or from a pragmatic point of view, communication between primary participants, speakers and addressees, because after all this the event or the meeting is made for them, and then secondary participants, the interpreters. So the relationship is not direct between the primary participants and the secondary participants. Here the interpreter is at the same time the receiver and the sender of the message, but not the author or the addressee. except on rare occasions when the speaker wants to draw attention to the interpreter's performance or wants to comment on the interpreter's performance, I can here share with you that very famous example by leader Muammar al-Gaddafi when he gave a talk at the UN, and he stopped, had the phone, and he said, "I wonder how the interpreter would translate this," when he used an Arabic saying, "مما زاد الطين بلة," and he said, "Oh, Mr. Interpreter, we do not translate it this way. It is translated as add insult to injury." So between speakers and audience on the one hand and an interpreter on the other, there is a considerable physical distance during simultaneous interpreting when interpreters are working from the booth. So the communication situation is most of the time shared when the interpreter is working from the booth, but not necessarily the physical space. An interpreter is confined in his booth or her booth, in the back of the hall, or in another room, even sometimes in another country in the case of video conferences. So in these cases the interpreter follows the proceedings via a monitor, and it is very delicate for the interpreter because he is not present in that space. And I know that one of the speakers has addressed the remote simultaneous interpreting platforms, Tony Leigh, and we discussed there the advantages and the disadvantages of working remotely or working using blind booth. So an audience is made of specialists, laymen and non-native speakers. So the needs are different, and if you are not there, it will become very hard for you to guess which word you should use, so because of the different language requirements. Now I'm going to investigate the shared context. Translator versus interpreter. Interpreting alike translation is an activity that implies a shared communicative situation between speakers, addressees and interpreters. And here you can see that I'll tell you an example of a conference in which one of the interpreters, the Arabic booth, was referring to one speaker as him, because the voice is a man-like voice, while the speaker was a woman. So it is very important for the speaker to be there and to discover, to do a sort of exploration in the hall, to know who are the speakers and the names and so on, like the example of Ms. Sharpston, one of the advocates general of the the European Court of Justice. So the shared context is also helpful for the interpreters to know how to translate certain words, like titles. And a title is used to address or refer to a high-ranking official, such as an ambassador or a governor. And Arabic is really rich in modes of address, and honorary titles differ greatly across the social, religious and political hierarchies. I would like to give the example of excellencies in one of the speeches given again by Antonio Guterres. He said, "Excellencies," and the interpreter knows that in the room there are heads of states, no monarchs, no princes, but presidents, prime ministers and ambassadors.
basically. So I think if the interpreter has some space, speaker is not going fast, he can unpack that term, translating it as أصحاب الفخامة والمعالي والسعادة, and so on and so forth. There is another example in a conference held in the Peace Palace in The Hague, which houses the International Court of Justice, the ICJ. One session of that conference took place in the Japanese room, which owes its name to the superb silk tapestry on the walls, and those tapestries were given by the Japanese government to the Peace Palace as a gift, and that tapestry is full of flowers and birds. So the chair of that session made allusion to that in his introductory speech, in which he started to describe the birds, the tapestry, and so on, to come to the conclusion that judicial systems like tapestry are making societies more coherent. So here the interpreter had the advantage of being there, seeing what the speaker is describing, to be more faithful to the meaning. Again, there is another journey, which is the journey of idiomaticity and intertextuality. Sometimes you refer, you quote from other texts, even though the original discourse is not that idiomatic. Just one very simple example: a speaker starting, for example, a new item on the agenda about fundraising, saying, for example, that and we move on now to money, and that how fundraising is crucial to our activities. I think here you can go the extra mile a little bit, saying that وننتقل الآن للخوض في مسألة المال والمال قوام الأعمال. I think المال قوام الأعمال is idiomatic expression in Arabic, and I think if the speaker were an Arabic speaking person, would be using that. So I think there is no problem of going also translating some stuff with idiomatic expressions. Or, for example, and we move on now to the field of, or the subfield of, we can translate it into نحط الآن الرحال في هذا المجال, and so on. There is also a physical and logistical journey. The map of the world has to be very present in the head of the interpreter, or at least the map of the country in which or from which the participants come, or they are discussing about. Just one example: I served one conference on Syria crisis, and there was a question of deployment of troops and so on into a place called Al Jazeera, and the interpreter made a very serious mistake by translating Al Jazeera into the island in English. But Al Jazeera is a region in the northeast of Syria, and it is not a coastal, it is not an island. So that is a serious mistake. Another example from Sudan: there are two areas that are called always the two areas, أو المنطقتين. They are very recurrent in the speeches, منطقتين. So you have to have an idea about what are these two areas. These are South Cordovan and Blue Nile areas. There are also some technical challenges in the sound system, the interpreting system, and the interpreter has also to move on to do that journey also to avoid challenges and technical issues, because simultaneous interpreting requires the use of microphones, headsets, booths, and so on. In case, for example, of whispering without technical devices and technical facilities, the interpreter's voice would cover the speaker, so the interpreter's voice covers that of the speaker due to ambient noise in the room, like ventilation, and this is really very bad for the vocal cords, and it is also very hard to interpret when there is difficulty hearing the speaker. I'm going to go fast now with the psychological and mental journeys. Psychological, we have to have passion for the job, for interpreting. We need to overcome fear and to manage the mental effort, as explained by Kilian Sieber and Daniel Gilles, how to deal with rapid delivery and foreign accents, and we have discussed this in other previous talks, how to split the attention, and Daniel Gilles has discussed this extensively in his talk, how to manage stress. So many interpreters have discussed this, also time constraints and the limited amount of information, especially in sensitive and confidential meetings. We have also discussed this. There is also a journey in the mind of the interpreter, the input, how to comprehend, how to conduct active listening, and how to make the transfer or the conversion, to have recourse to the memory, and then also to produce a fluent and coherent output in the target language. So all of this system is really very important for the interpreter, and there is a journey. It's the journey of meaning, exactly like a machine coming in the form of an input, comprehend, and then processing, and then output. Also the exploration. The exploration takes place in three phases. The exploration in the preparation, the pre-event, at the pre-event phase, doing the exploration of the institutions, the participants, and so on and so forth, and also during the event, exploration at the event, by knowing exactly and making use of that shared context, who is there, who is going to speak, to get used to the accents, and also exploration when interpreting on mic, in a way, in that those very few seconds, 10 seconds, you do the exploration like a pathfinder, guessing what he might be saying, the speaker. So in that, I would call it the décalage time. The décalage means the time lag between the speaker and the interpreter. There is also another journey that is cultural, the cultural journey, and I'm going to skip this, and I'm really very lucky that I'm speaking after Professor House, who has discussed this extensively. There are challenges the interpreters are facing with humor, sarcasm, and jokes, because these are culture specific. Interpreting is an intercultural communication par excellence. The communicative situation involving the interpreter is always and by necessity an instance of intercultural communication. Kundo et al., 1997. Any interpreted event is an instance of intercultural communication. The example of access to justice, for example. Access to justice, the English speakers and the culture, they would they favor terms like access, but in Arabic this is really, sometimes it is pejorative to use nafadh, which is the literal equivalent of access. Access to justice, النفاذ إلى العدالة, I would say الاحتكام إلى القضاء. better الاحتكام إلى سبل العدالة أو آليات العدالة, not only القضاء, justice or courts, but also alternative mechanisms such as mediation or arbitration. Culture-bound terms and expressions. These are hampering sometimes communication. There are many different ways to categorize culture-bound items or terms, and I think the categorization put forward by Peter Newmark is still sound, who made a categorization based on ecology first, material culture, artifacts, and then social culture, organization, customs, activities, procedures, concepts, and gestures and habits. For example, it is very important for the interpreter to know the culture of the source language and the culture of the target language. I remember I was interpreting an event and the Dutch organizer wanted to have an idea about the preferences of the Arab participants, and one of them said, I like fish, for example, and the Dutch speaker said, you will be we will have a surprise for you here because there is herring. So here herring, if the interpreter is not familiar with herring, that is the tiny fish that is smoked, and then it will be very difficult to translate that. There are other examples here, like cultural also, culturally speaking. One example is culture abduction, and in two different legal cultures, it is really problematic. And I remember that many interpreters translated child abduction as اختطاف الأطفال, child abduction by their own parents. So abduction for the Arabs it can be translated as al-ikhtitaf, and ikhtitaf in Arabic is a criminal offense and cannot be an act done or carried out by the parents. That's why I suggested the term intizah, means to take the child away from the other parent. Also other examples that are really culture specific, such as custody, and most interpreters, they translate it as al-hadana, while custody in Arabic is either hadana or wilaya. Hadana is the custody, the custody that is granted to the mother, and al-wilaya is the custody that is granted to the father. In addition to the very problematic term of kafala, and whether kafala is adoption in the English tradition or the English legal practice. And here I can display recording of an interview with the president of the European Court, and this question of kafala, whether it is adoption, is a case brought before the court from the Supreme Court of the UK. There was a case of two spouses of French nationality resident in the United Kingdom applied to the United Kingdom authorities for entry clearance as an adopted child for an Algerian child placed in their guardianship recueil légal in Algeria under the kafala system. Following the refusal of the United Kingdom authorities to grant clearance, a decision which was appealed by the child, the Supreme Court of the United Kingdom has asked the Court of Justice, in essence, whether under Directive 2004/38 EC the child can be classed as a direct descendant of the individuals in whose guardianship she was placed under kafala. This would facilitate her family reunification in the member state, Britain, where those individuals are resident. In conclusion, one can safely argue that thoughtful travel does not carry and reinforce the interpreting and mediation competencies and skills, but also often is an interpreting act in its own right. Second, interpreting is an attractive profession for people of curious and independent cast of mind. Third, like a traveler, the interpreter in his exercise takes multiple journeys through strange and intricate worlds. 4. Traveling interpreters come to appreciate and comprehend novel arguments, ideas, new ways of thinking, unusual accents that less traveling interpreters may never accommodate or consider. 5. But we can only reap those rewards of travel if we are open to them and if we reach the land of dates and cereal harvesting. So let's take the summer and winter journeys and get beyond our comfort zone and need to choose to be challenged and start recording ourselves, recording our creative interpreting products and songs. Regular travel might have restrictions, like in the circumstances of COVID-19, but interpreting journeys will continue forever without any restrictions. Thank you very much for your attention.
And I'm really sorry for my lengthy talk. I fell in the rabbit hole, as I've told you. Over to you, Professor.
Thank you very much, Hammouda. This was absolutely lovely. Definitely not too long, but very poetic, very insightful, and may I say also very charming lecture. Right? Can I start asking or making 3 comments before I turn over to the audience? Is this possible?
Yes, I can hear you. Thank you. Please go ahead.
Yes, I just wanted to make a few remarks before we can turn over to the audience and question. Can I do this?
Yes, please go ahead.
As a sort of discussion. First of all, I want to say that not only interpreters do travel thoughtfully and very aware and very tolerantly, but also people like myself, a translation scholar. I have traveled around the world and I can also subscribe to everything you say. I've been to Kazakhstan, I've been to South Africa, I've been to Peru, I've been to etc., etc. But actually also if you work as a translation scholar, you can also do this. Second comment, in German, the German term for translation is Übersetzung, which means it's very nice. Übersetzung, what you do with a boat from one shore to another shore, right? And the German term for experience is Erfahrung, and fahren means to travel, to drive. So that's also that would help you in your argumentation.
Yes.
I have another comment that struck me when you talked about that the interpreter tends to be distrusted from both sides, from the locals, etc. I grew up, I was born in Berlin in 1942, so you see how old I am. My father was a wonderful man, just like you talked about your mother. He spoke Russian fluently and also English because he's been to the United States. He taught himself Russian. After the Second World War, in Berlin, he acted as interpreter for the Russians and for the Americans. And I still remember, I was a small child, there were always the jeeps by these occupying nations, and he kept us alive via interpreting. So it was a very, very useful profession in that it kept, otherwise we would have probably starved. And also more to somebody in the audience commented that the interpreter gets killed often in times of war. For instance, in Iraq, and I thought there is in the German news that there was a heavy German contingent in Afghanistan. And I read that the Afghan Pashto or Farsi-speaking interpreters, they were shot later when the Germans disappeared and went home. they left the interpreters alone, which actually many people said was a crime by the German troops. And my last little point is, you mentioned that the shared communicative situation in interpreting. This is, of course, different in translation. We also have a shared communicative situation, but it is it's a mental, cognitive one only, which is different from the real communicative sharedness in interpreting. Okay? So far, once again, thank you very much for your, I've really very much enjoyed your lecture, and I hope we will meet in person sometime when we can travel again.
Hopefully. Okay? Thank you very much.
Okay.
I think these are comments, but I totally agree with you on everything.
I just, while you were talking, I put down my thoughts, and I thought I must say. So how do we continue now? People who want to say something.
So I can see them. I don't know whether you can see the participants, and there is a blue hand. Can you see it? Professor Mohammed Al-Mansouri first. Professor Mohammed Al-Mansouri. Then.
Can I say something, Hammouda? Why don't you guide the discussion? Because
yes, please. Please. Okay. Thank you. Yeah, with pleasure. Professor Mohammed Al-Mansouri, please. Yes.
Hello. Good evening, everyone. Thank you very much, Professor House. Thank you, Dr. Salhi, for your enlightening talks. Professor House spoke about the need to strengthen linguistic and cultural competence among translators.
Yes.
And Dr. Salhi spoke about translators as nomads. I'd like to see this nomadism accessible to our students. When I was a student, I had the opportunity to spend a whole year in England. Our system was like that. You choose to do English, you go and spend a whole year in an English-speaking country.
Mm-hmm.
Now, our students are denied this. So how can they access that culture? How can they know more about it? How can they encompass in their training all those concepts that were introduced? So this is really a problem with regard to the training of our translators, or all those who do a different language, let's say English or even French. Why not those who do French go and spend a year in France and then, learn a lot about this? So if you see any competence in Tunisians with regard to English or with regard to French, then this is due probably among the older generation to that opportunity to be able to spend some year in contact with that culture.
Yeah.
But before leaving both of you with this question, I'd like to, if I may, share with you a bit on the main virtue of introducing that analogy of a medical doctor that you, Professor House, introduced. A medical doctor is a reader of science. They look at the science and they read. And they introduce all those aspects that you have introduced. They take into consideration the fact that there's a humanistic aspect, that there's a cognitive aspect, that they take into consideration anthropology, that they take into consideration the fact that you have a main group and then you have subgroups in the culture. So probably this could be one way of introducing our translation and interpretation students to learning more about what is required of professionalism. So I'd love really to hear some of your thoughts on these aspects. And I'd like to thank you again for a rare opportunity that is offered to us. Professor House, many of my students are using your models for evaluation of translation and things like that, and they are referring to your books. And I have also introduced them to your presentation of last week so that they can really learn a lot from it and introduce as much as they can in their work. Thank you again very much, both of you.
Yes.
Thank
Lovely.
you. Over to you, Professor House.
Yes, when I mentioned these few remarks about the professionalism of the translator, what I really wanted to say is that basically upgrading the profession from, as you know, the status and the recognition of interpreters and translators is not on a par with highly esteemed professionals like doctors, like lawyers, etc., even engineers. People think, aha, it's just somebody who, knows the language and he does something like that. And I think we should change that. Basically, in order to be able to translate well and to interpret, and interpreting, I recognize, is more difficult because it has to be done under enormous time pressure. But in order to be able to do this task professional, it's a very difficult, and translators need to be educated, highly educated. And I mean, your suggestion of traveling to a foreign country and staying there for a year is well and good, but you can also do this online nowadays. I mentioned to Hammouda, my daughter studied and learned Arabic. She's now married to a man from Tunisia. I mentioned this before. She learned Tunisian Arabic, and she learned Arabic over the internet, and she's constantly doing to get better, etc. You can do a lot also just by reading. You can read. I mean, you have to be a voracious reader. Voracious. You have to read all the time. This is very, very important. You don't have to go to expensive courses. You can do this on your own if you're really in love with the subject and with the profession. That's what I would say. It's good. I mean, not everybody can travel to foreign countries, but you can do a lot by reading and self-educating yourself. It's possible, and people do this far too little. Sorry, I'm preaching now.
Thank you very much, Professor House. Thank you, Professor Mansouri, for your very kind visit. I cannot add much to what Professor House has already said. And here, it's a problem of opportunities. And opportunities, unfortunately, have become individualized. So each one has to open windows for or room for opportunities to travel abroad. And I think this is not only the problem of novice translators and interpreters to be exposed to the foreign culture or the foreign language, but also a problem for experienced translators and interpreters. And you know, Professor Mohammed, that so many interpreters, they don't have a Schengen visa, and it is really very problematic to fly them to an event taking place in a European country. So I think there are some challenges and restrictions. This is towards the end of my presentation. I made reference to that. But I think exactly like Professor House has said, I think the internet now is providing tremendous opportunities. But again, I am a true believer of face-to-face contact and nomadism, I would say. Because we cannot go to the harvesting online. We cannot do the harvesting online. So we have to be there on the spot. So with that, thank you very much again. I would, with your permission, Professor House, can we take rounds of questions, 3 or 4 each time, for the interest of time, because I can see so many hands shown.
Yes, do.
Yes, thank you. So let's have, sorry, excuse me, just one. Yeah. Wisal, and then Sami, then Khidiri, then Mohammed Zagoud as a first round. And then second round, Mohammed, and then Dina Qabbani, then Salwa Al-Batut, then Salwa Al-Batut. Yes, please, first round, Wisal, Sami, Khidiri, and Mohammed. Mohammed Zagoud.
Hi, thank you so much, Dr. Salhi, and thank you so much, Dr. House. So, you know, novice interpreters.
She is a professor.
And it doesn't matter.
Thank you, sorry.
No problem.
Thank you. So, Novice interpreters nowadays are most likely to commit some slight mistakes when interpreting, especially for the first time, first, second, and third times. They don't pay attention to when it comes to terminology, for instance. They don't, for example, they don't distinguish the difference between الخطأ والغلط or السجن والحبس. And so they say what they think delivers the meaning. And that can be catastrophic or disastrous sometimes. So how to deal with that, especially when the novice interpreter is not sure whether or not that term is right to use. And the conversation is still going and they run out of time. So what do they do when they're not sure about it?
Thank you very much.
I have a
please,
question, if you don't mind.
Yeah, go ahead, please.
Okay, so the world of freelancing is sometimes hostile to contracts. What do you have to say about this? And
thank you very much.
Thank you.
I didn't understand the second question, sorry.
So they said the world of freelancing is hostile to interpreters or something like that.
Oh yeah, okay.
Yeah. Excellent, thank you, Wisal. Sami.
Marhaba.
Ahlan wa sahlan.
Good evening to everyone. Madam
Yes.
House, thank you very much for your presentation. Dr. Salhi, thank you very much for the journey. You took us through, in a journey through landscape and time, what is needed to be a good traveler, a good interpreter. It is a pity that the word interpreter does not include a suffix like trans, which translates movement. It is a pity that interpreter includes something that it is introspective rather than the contrary, knowing that interpretation doesn't need introspection. It needs exactly the contrary. Thank you as well for having started by telling us the story with your mom. We all say that good interpreters are interpreters who translate into their mother tongue. So I guess there is also a link between the story with your mother and the fact that we are always talking first in classifying languages as mother tongues and secondary tongues. You also spoke about the question of trusting interpreters in Latin. A translator, let's say, is called traduttore, which is said sometimes to be also traditore, someone who does not remain faithful, who is a traitor to the message. And there is a very interesting word in French that is truchement, which comes from the word torjuman, and but it means just the intermediary. Ceci a été fait par le truchement d'un monsieur, d'un intermédiaire, d'un interprète. It is very interesting to see that our job as interpreters has found a place in French dictionaries with a meaning that always recalls the translatory process. You said that an interpreter is a traveler. That's true. I feel as an interpreter, as a citizen of the world, not only a Belgian citizen or a Moroccan citizen. The question of mistrust is very interesting because in the far past, when we read how interpreters were used in the Ottoman Empire, interpreters are also used as ambassadors. That's really interesting. There is a very, very close link between the two jobs. The job of being ein Botschafter in German, and someone who carries a message. A Botschafter, Boodschapper in Dutch, means someone who carries a message. And interpreters carry a message. And German and Dutch languages, they have this in the word ambassador, ein Botschafter. And interpreters also carry messages. There is an English expression that says, don't kill the messenger,
Mhm.
It's also valid for interpreters. Don't kill the interpreter, don't kill the translator. I'm only a messenger.
Mhm.
I've been quite surprised when you spoke, Hammouda, about the tour guides becoming overnight interpreters. Can you please tell us more about this experience? Because I'm buzzed when I hear such things. And I know you understand what I mean. You also said that interpreters are considered usually as secondary participants. I do not think so. When I deal with clients, I always try to educate clients so that they understand that interpretation and interpreters are not to be considered as secondary participants. They are the primary participants, because without interpreters, there will be no event. So maybe we should think twice about the role of the turjuman, the intermediary. Is it only a secondary role, or is it the principal role? I liked also the examples that you led regarding some mistranslations, or the fact that in the combination between English and Arabic, sometimes we need two words or three in order to translate a single word. Indeed, for the example you said, excellencies. As an interpreter, I always translated into Arabic by Ashab al-Fakhara wal-Ma'ali wa-Sa'ada. But when I'm in Jordan, I add a fourth one, Ashab al-Utufa.
Al-Utufa.
You know that?
I know, of course.
What does it mean? It means that,
judges,
not only judges, ministers are called
Oh,
Utufa.
really? I know it's judges.
Ministers, they don't use Ma'ali, they use Utufa. So it means that an interpreter needs to know geography, as you said, and needs to know history, and an interpreter needs to know his audience as well. Just one, so I actually put two questions regarding the tour guide, regarding the role of the interpreter, or his position in an event, principal or secondary, and just one little observation regarding what Dr. Mansouri said. In Europe, we have a program called Erasmus Mundi.
Yes.
I'm not a promoter of that program, but I do not believe that such programs are only open or possible to European citizens. On the contrary, there is Erasmus, which is open and accessible to European universities and students, and Erasmus Mundo is, or Mundi, I don't remember, is open to students from the Mediterranean and from the Balkan area. I think even from some farther countries. So there are still possibilities to have exchange between students and universities.
Thank you. Sami, are you done?
Yes. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Sami. Let's move on to Khadiri, Nargis.
Yes, thank you very much, doctors, for this amazing opportunity given us. I have a little question to Professor House. I was wondering if we can apply the mode of text analysis on oral texts, like audiovisual scripts, just like a written text. Thank you very much. This was my question.
Thank you. Muhammad?
Hello, everyone.
Hi, Dr. Zahoud. Yes, go ahead, please.
Yeah, thank you very much, Dr. Salhi, for this inspiring talk. It really inspires like our students to become interpreters like yourself. And thank you, Professor House, for your talk about culture. I myself recently used your translation quality assessment model in one of my recent papers. and I hope hopefully it will be published very soon. And my questions or like two comments to Dr. Salhi. First of all, thank you very much for the journey. You took us from like this scratch to your personal experience, moving to like some hints or like instructions to interpreters. I like all of these. And as I understood from your talk, that you are a researcher, interpreter, translation teacher, translator, and creative writer as well. So, my question here is, because I do like 4 of these tasks. I do interpreting, I do translation, I teach translation, and I conduct research in translation and interpreting studies. So my question here, where do you find yourself? Do you find yourself as an interpreter, translator, creative writer, or where do you find yourself exactly?
I can tell you right away from now. I am a jack of all trades, master of none.
Okay.
No, you are
Very
master
modest.
of all.
He's too modest. Come on. Don't be fishing for compliments, Hammouda.
I do agree with the Professor House. You are master of all. My second question is, as I've understood that you are interpreting like English, Arabic, Arabic, English, French, Arabic, French, English, or 3 languages. So if we are taking directionality into consideration, where do you think you find yourself like much more comfortable? Whether you are when you are interpreting from English into Arabic or Arabic into English or French or what languages you interpret from. Then my third comment is on the term that you mentioned, and Sami has just commented, which is excellency. In the Gulf area, they add another term when they interpret this into Arabic. They interpret this into like أصحاب الفخامة والمعالي والسعادة والسمو. In addition to
والجلالة.
Yeah, والجلالة. Yes, exactly. Yes. So these are my comments, and thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
We really enjoyed your talk.
Thank you very much. Professor House, with your permission again, because I can see 2 or 3 hands have disappeared. So only 1 hand left. Salwa Batut, can we take her?
Yes, sure.
Yes, please.
Okay.
Yes, Salwa, please.
First of all, I thank you for these very interesting presentations. Do you hear me?
Yes, very well. And we can see you with your red headset as well.
Okay. So do you think that the performance of the interpreter who has a cultural background of the source and the target language, je parle ici des 2 langues, is always better than the performance of that interpreter who has not this background? Here I call this background a journey in the cultures. What do you think about that?
Clear, thank you very much. Okay, perhaps Professor House, if you'd like to react on some of the questions asked.
Yes, the first person was, I think, Vishal or somebody.
Yeah.
I can't say much about the terminology. That was the question about the terminology and how difficult it is, right, Vishal? That's what you said. I can only say that there must be very good data banks with many languages that you can nowadays access over the internet, and there you can do research on the various terms. About freelancing, obviously, I can't say much, how it is difficult to freelance. I mean, Hammouda can probably answer that. Shall we take turns with the individual speakers, Hammouda?
Yeah,
you
of
say
course.
Something now? Yes?
Yeah.
And I continue with Sami.
With Sami, yes. For Wisal, yes, I think novice interpreters, they have to commit mistakes in the beginning. So this is the objective. Means they will learn by experience. That's why I have emphasized on the role of experience. And experience is not an accomplishment or something that we can get overnight. It requires time, training, and experiment. So what I would like to recommend is to engage in a life of experiments and experiences, in the sense that you do not only wait for real life conferences, but rather you can create your own conference home by receiving a headset like the internet, YouTube, and you record your output, and then you comment on that. And little by little, you will know what is the difference between غلط and خطأ, or any other term like افتراء. And also you will get rid, little by little, you will get rid of the fear, because the fear is hampering the sometimes the communication and the interpreter from performing well. With regard to freelancing and the freelancing world as hostile to the interpreters, yes, there is a big difference between freelance interpreters and staff members, especially when it comes to trust. And here I wanted to link this to the question asked by Sami. Staff members are more trusted because they know the speakers in the organization, and most of them, they are given the text beforehand, early in advance. But freelance interpreters not, especially when the meeting is sensitive. It is hostile also during the first steps. That's why I recommend that you have recourse to recommendations and sponsoring by senior interpreters and more experienced interpreters. So you have to travel through the wings of the wings of an experienced interpreter, and the winds also. Yes. So these are my responses to Wisal's questions. Over to you, Professor House.
Yes, let's continue with the very insightful remarks and comments and questions by Sami. You were in the previous meeting as well, I remember you. And first of all, you made a remark about, or commented about, the interpreter as a traitor, or he or she is always seen as a traitor. That is quite true. And again, I can give you the example of my father after the Second World War in Berlin in 1945. I remember my mother, I was too small then, told us later how the neighbors were suspicious of us, because my father did this interpreting job for the Russians and the Americans that were there in Berlin after the war. As you know, there were four parties, the French, the Russians, the Americans, and the British. And my father did this. And they really looked at us as traitors because of my father's job. And for mentioning Botschafter, actually is somebody who carries a message, the interpreter as well. But I have to basically contradict you in when you talk about the primary role of the interpreter. You very nicely said there wouldn't be any message or anything if it were not for the interpreter. But on the other hand, I mean, I have written, this is in my books, it is always a secondary task, because something is there and then the translator or the interpreter does something. So I would definitely say secondary, but secondary is not bad. It's maybe we can use a different term, a facilitating role, we could say. Would you be happy with that?
I agree with you. I totally, yes. Of course. How can I not agree with you?
You were slightly jocular. But let me also talk about what you mentioned, Erasmus. And Erasmus Money. In my active time as a university professor in Hamburg, we of course had many Erasmus people, Erasmus in the European sense. And I have to say, that may disappoint you, it never properly worked. It was always one-sided. For instance, it was always the Germans who went to France, for instance, and the French had no interest. It was a one-way thing, which I thought was not the idea. And secondly, the Erasmus students, when they came for only, let's say, 3 months, they never learned the language they were supposed to learn. They met with other people and they spoke English and they didn't do what they were supposed to do. Personally, and this may sound very cynical, it was a complete waste of money, right? So that's my personal non-scientific opinion.
There is another program within the European Union which is called the University of the UFM, the Union for the Mediterranean, which has 2 seats, one in Slovenia and one in the city of Fes.
Does it work?
Yeah, it is quite good. I think that it is a good occasion to spread that kind of information and knowledge.
Okay.
I think that Erasmus Mundus works a bit better than the real Erasmus.
The other one didn't. Seriously, many people say.
Yeah, I agree with you.
It was a holiday program. It's lovely. It was in Hammouda's term. It was travel paid by somebody else, but the opportunity wasn't really used. Not in all cases, obviously. I'm generalizing a little bit, but
it depends, of course, on
the individual.
On the individual. So there is that program, and there is the other one, which is the University of the UFM, which is very interesting. So maybe your students, Professor Hammouda, Professor Mansouri, would be interested in checking those places. And if you need any guidance, I'm at your disposal.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you very much, Sami, for the offer. Okay.
Thank you so much, Sami.
Thank you. I'm aware of time, but Professor House, you are the master, and you manage the time the way you like, and of course,
yes. And actually, in about 20 minutes, because it's 20 to 10, in about 20 minutes, it's my bedtime. I usually
so let's stop in
10, and I get up at 5 or 6. Never. I'm joking. It's ridiculous.
Yes. 15 minutes and then we finish. Okay. So very quickly, I would like to get to respond to Sami's questions. Interpreter or the route does not include the element of travel. Yes, but it is more. Includes the ta'wil. Ta'wil is a fully fledged discipline, or ta'wil al-hadith in Arabic. And it is a miracle that is given to prophets, Yusuf, Ta'wil al-Hadith. So when Yusuf or Joseph was informing them about the food of that day, so taking certain events that are taking place outside the scene, that particular scene, which it was a prison scene at the time. So Ta'wil is really more noble than even to travel, but it is the knowledge of something taking place elsewhere. Mother tongue, yes, and mistrust. Traditori, the translator is a traitor, traduire c'est trahir, turjuman kha'in khawan, and don't kill the interpreter. I totally agree with you. But the question about tour guides, yes, most of them, they have very at least the names in my mind now, they have a very advanced education degree. They are very well educated, and they have served the encounters with tourists and so on, knowing the places, and they are perfectly bilingual or trilingual most of the time. And then they stepped in, and with experience of over 2 years, I think, this is the feedback of some, not only me, but some colleague interpreters, and they really appreciate their performance. And I know there are some interpreters here from Tunisia, and they know them. So, but I agree with you, and I know why you are asking this question. But I totally agree with you on the training and the like. With the interpreters are the climate of mistrust again and killing the interpreters. I would like to state another, or to share another information. Here in Tunisia, after the toppling of the former regime, some officials implicated with the former regime have been included in a book that was called the Black Book. And I know at least 4 or 5 interpreters and translators were included in that black book as because they were translating for the former regime. So I think this is not a sin or a betrayal. But this is really a very good question to be raised. Or in Iraq, so many interpreters are being killed in conflict zones in Iraq and Afghanistan and so on.
Yeah.
Secondary participants, the status, I mean in the communication. And on the contrary, I'm a proponent of the idea of the interpreter going the extra mile with the client and assuming some other roles, sometimes like advisors. And a host. If you have a rich guy who is in Tunisia and doesn't know how to have a proper haircut, or to know the equivalent medicine here in Tunisia, so I think you can go the extra mile and help. So this is a status, or also provide some cultural consultation, in the sense that you say, well, this is not proper here, to say it culturally speaking. And here I'm aware of time, but I'm going to share with you a short story. There was in a crowd management workshop, there was a training, a drill, with officers acting or playing the role of the writers, and other officers playing the role of police officers. And there were two rich guys and trainers, one with the mob and one with the police officers, and they were encouraged, the mob, to tease and provoke the police officers who are with their shields, with Robocops and everything, and to throw some missiles or missiles, like in English pronunciation or American pronunciation means to throw anything, like bottles or stones and so on. And one of the rich trainers found a piece of bread on a small wall, so he took it and he has thrown it onto the shields, and the exercise stopped at that time. And he didn't understand why, what happened. He says, Hammouda, tell me what happened. And here the interpreter has to act as a mediator, a cultural mediator, explaining what happened. This is not proper to throw that piece of bread that is put over there for birds to eat, and this is a blessing, and it is really offensive if you throw it onto like that. So I think, and so many other examples, I have written them, and I have recorded this, by the way, from the speaker himself. Yes, with regard to the role of participant, of course, he has to go the extra mile, but in that communication, because the conference is not being held for the sake of the interpreter. It's for the speakers sharing knowledge with the audience. So it is in the communication, but the status, of course, I'm a proponent of a much greater role to be given to the interpreter. Thank you. So, yeah, next, please, Professor House.
Yeah, can you about the secondary role again that Sami attacked? I think with all what Hammouda just said, it would be saying something like a facilitating role, making something happen and helping people to understand the differences. I think facilitating is actually is much better than secondary, because secondary has a connotation of being, yes, has a slightly sort of belittling connotation. I agree. Anyway, the next question was by, if I pronounce it correctly, is Kadri?
Yes.
Yes. And actually my model can be and has been applied to audiovisual and to interpreting events also. It has, for instance, also been applied to the cover of books. There's a wonderful book, Recovered Rose, or whatever the title is, and it's just applied to titles and covers with pictures on it, etc. So it's perfectly possible to do this with a bit of adaptation, obviously, right? So that was your question, and I've answered it.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, you're very welcome. And the next one was, I think, Mohammed, right?
Yeah, Mohammed Zaroud.
And it was directed at you, I think. It was mainly interpreting.
Yeah, I will answer it very quickly. So thank you very much for the nice words, Dr. Zaroud. About the status, yeah, I have already answered the question on status, where I find myself. I think I'm doing everything. So here, and everything is serving the other. And I am really happy with that meeting point, to be placed in that meeting point between the three backgrounds, because when I'm teaching, I can bring to the students very empirical knowledge and experiences and stories from the market. And when I am doing interpreting, I am relying on the research I'm conducting, the things that have been investigated by other researchers, and so on and so forth. With regard to the directionality, I am more comfortable with Arabic into English. English into Arabic. So this is my main direction. But of course, when you interpret, especially abroad, you have to do the retour into English. So I am basically more comfortable English, Arabic, and secondly, Arabic into English, and then from French into Arabic, and then French into English. But occasionally I cannot do simultaneous interpreting into French, the French both, I don't do it, except in consecutive, I can do into French. With excellencies, yes, because this is also knowing your audience. In that the meeting I mentioned earlier, there were no princes or monarchs present there. And Batut, of course, I agree with you. Having a bilingual and bicultural background is an asset to an advantage to the interpreter. And I am not lucky. Perhaps I'm from Tunisia. I have only one, let's say, cultural background by birth and by education, and I am really fascinated by the interpreters who have bilingual, like Sami here. I can see bicultural or bilingual background. And I know a colleague of mine who is really, when I ask her, where are you from? She cannot answer the question. She is from Canada, born there. Her mother is American. She got married to a French, and she lived most of her time in South France and some part in Africa. And then now, sorry, not American, British American, British Canadian, lived most of her time in France, and then now she is based in Switzerland, in Geneva. So it is really problematic. Sometimes one gets confused. Although she is British and Canadian, and from the English part, Canada, but she is more comfortable, and I like her interpreting into French more than this is experience again, and the being exposed to the language. She lost some of her mother tongue, which is English. Yes. Thank you very much, and I think I answered all of the questions. Professor House, would you like to?
Yeah, I just wanted to add to the advantage of the bilingual or the bicultural. I just wanted to, add some comforting remarks for all those poor people who do not have this bilingual or bicultural. You can always offset it just by what I said before, by reading and acquiring knowledge. It's not, there's so much to be done on the internet nowadays. And I can only again mention my wonderful daughter, whom I love very much, and how she manages to speak Tunisian Arabic perfectly. And she learned it, first of all, not before she married and has a family here not here, in Tunisia. She learned it over the internet. It's possible. If you have the motivation and you want to do it, you can always offset the disadvantage of not being bilingual and bicultural, right? It's absolutely perfect. Or again, from my own family, my father taught himself during the Second World War when he was sort of out of a job, whatever. And he was very good. There were no media at the time. In 1940, whatever, but it's possible if you do hard work, and this is for the students, do everything. It's very, very important. but obviously it's an asset to have two cultural or bilingual, but you can offset it if you don't have it. That's what I wanted to say.
Thank you. Let me ask you a question, Professor House, of a journalistic nature.
Yes.
Do you know some words in Tunisian Arabic? Do you know some words in Tunisian Arabic? Can you give us examples if you know?
I knew something about the at the end of Ramadan. What did you say?
It's a trap. It's a trap.
What? No, it's not a trap, is it?
No.
Yeah,
we say Aishik. Or for the Eid Mabruk. Eid Mabruk.
Eid Mabruk. Yes, I knew this because I had to say it. Eid Mabruk.
Eid Mabruk, yes. Okay, so I should charge you for this interpreting service, Professor House. Okay, let's take very quickly Muhammad Salih Isa, then Mirvet Saber, then Malek Shaib, and if we have some time, Sami again. And then Reem Hassan. Can you please go quickly for the interest of time?
Yes,
yes. We have still 5 minutes left almost.
Right. Anyway, who's the first one?
Muhammad Salih.
It's me, I guess. Greetings, professors.
Oh, the sound is horrible.
The background noise, I think.
I hope it's now better.
Yeah.
Yes, now.
Okay. So you talked about your travel and journeys to the world of language and culture, whether it is physical or spiritual. And with that in view, how do you assess your journey through the depths of the virtual world with the pandemic going on and remote interpreting? Does it really qualify to physical traveling? I mean, here we are having this fantastic discussion, meeting professionals, scholars, almost from all over the world, that otherwise wouldn't be possible without the cutting-edge technology cutting the distance between us. And thank you.
Thank you very much, Muhammad. Now, Mirvet, please.
Where is she? Oh, our co-host.
Co-host, yes.
Yes.
Mirvet, are you there? Malik Shaib, and then we'll go back to Mirvet. Malek, sorry.
Malek, yeah.
Malek, please.
So basically, I just wanted to thank you both for the talk and to ask where can we find the presentations, the recordings for these presentations, because I had to miss the one from last week.
Thank you.
And that's it. Thank you both. Bye.
Thank you, Malek.
Yes.
Sorry.
Sorry.
Mervet, yes, please.
Hi, everyone.
Hi.
Thank you, Professor. Thank you, Dr. Hammouda. And here I will just introduce myself as the Sufi as dancer. Let me show you this. I hope everyone will be able to.
Lucky you. I tried it. I tried.
Perfect.
I'm doing it too.
Very
Actually,
good.
I got, I was trained as a, so, and also traveler.
Yes.
And an interpreter. I just wanted to thank you so much. I really enjoyed it. Hammouda, thank you so much.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Mervet.
What a lovely session we had.
It is.
Lots of talent here.
Yeah. Reem Hassan, please.
Hi.
Dr. Reem. Hi.
Thank you very much for this journey. I really enjoyed it. I just wanted to share something with you is, as you know, I am a researcher as well, but I was not a interpreter. So I became an interpreter with refugees who came from Syria and Iraq. And my role became actually a facilitator because most of the refugees I work with, they don't speak very well Arabic, they don't speak very well English. And with time, I have to develop different methods and strategies to make them understand both languages, which are missing. And when you are talking about traveling and the journey from one country to another, I was thinking about them, how they have to live this bicultural life, how they have to build a new life between their first culture and then a new culture. And I think now I'm thinking of them, maybe in the future they'll be perfect translators and be perfect interpreters because they have this knowledge of both countries. Yeah. But also now when we speak about translation and interpretation. I noticed that we always speak in the context of conferences, but there are also interpreters and translators needed in social settings where people actually are suffering, where people need more understanding, more experience in life, not just linguistic skills, but also humanitarian skills. So that's also interpreters should think about it.
Very good.
Thank you very much. Very good comment. Let's take Dina Qabbani, please.
Hello. Thank you very much both for this wonderful talk. I really enjoyed it. I'm sorry I missed the last week ones, but I just want to comment on one thing that you've said that the interpreter could be I think the interpreter shouldn't be an advisor, because he should be, or she should be, or both of them should be the channel only to interpret, not to give any advice. Hello?
Yeah.
Yes, we're thinking.
Oh, right, okay.
You can't hear me think, I guess.
Or thinking.
Or thinking, yes. So are you done, Dina?
Pardon?
Okay.
It's just my comment is when you know the culture, that will enrich your interpreting and translation. That will give a very good quality. The interpreting will be very good if you know both cultures. But I don't think that the interpreter should give an advice, because you'll put yourself into deep trouble if you give the wrong advice. That's what I think.
Okay.
Thank you.
Good.
Got it. Okay, Ula Tahir, finally. Ula, quickly, please.
Yes, this is Ala Tahir from Egypt. Thank you for your own timing. Do you hear me well?
Yeah.
Yes, very well.
Yes, I would ask a question. I didn't know if it is relevant or not. Do you think, guys, that an interpreter could lose some kind of his identity, or find that he's following people, talking people's talks and doing their own way of thinking? Does this profession affect the character of interpreter, being not isolated, but the way of thinking could be demolished or something?
Yeah.
Interesting question.
Interesting.
Yes.
Thank you. So, Sami, finally, please, quickly.
Yes, please, very quickly. Thank you very much. I liked very much the last question, because interpretation is not a sickness, first of all, so it doesn't interfere with your temper. I just would like to go back to what you said, Hammouda. I said the staff interpreters are more trusted. I must disagree with you, because in our settings in the European Union and also in the United Nations, when you're a client in a meeting room, there is no distinction whatsoever between the staff interpreter and the freelance interpreter, the freelance interpreter in the booth. So nobody knows. Not to mention the fact that the question of trust is something that we have managed thanks to AIC, our international association for conference interpreters. We have a code of conduct. So if you are a member, you should apply those provisions. So staff interpreter, freelance interpreter, there is no distinction whatsoever in terms of trust.
Thank you. Yeah. Professor House, can you give your account of the questions?
I'm starting with Reem, because before that I don't think we. And I want to compliment you again. I thought it is a very, very well taken comment and suggestion. Is absolutely necessary. And nowadays, I mean, as you know, refugees are in Germany. We are the country in the European Union that has taken most refugees. Germany took in 1.5 million, which is a lot by far, and by population it's actually even more than Sweden. And there is a great demand for interpreters, and particularly with languages like Arabic and other languages as well. Sub-Saharan and African languages, etc. The same applies to, of course, doctors and other people working in other professions for the refugees. So thank you very much for bringing this into this talk. And I also want to comment on to Dina, saying the interpreter should be neutral because he gets into hot water or she gets into hot water if they don't. I mean, I think it's up to the discretion of the individual how far you go in taking sides or, you know, overstepping your inter-role, but being whatever. And again, a very interesting comment to Ola Taher, whether you can lose your identity by this constant whatever. Very interesting. I think this is the danger is there's much more of a danger for losing identity with somebody who works as a spy. I mean, spies lose their identities. I'm a great reader of spy novels. And somehow maybe you can, Hammouda, you can compare the interpreter with a spy. And spies often lose their identity because they don't know where they stand. But interpreters, I don't think so. Okay, so much for me. Hammouda, over to you.
Thank you very much, Professor House. I will be very quick in responding to the 3 or 4 questions asked. Mohammed Salah, the virtual world and the journey therein. Yes, of course. I am always describing the internet as a horse taking us very far. But I am using those journeys with more caution. I'm cautious because I've read a book that made a turning point in my life, written by the former Directors General of Google, entitled The New Digital Age, and the warfare, the digital warfare, and so I'm not really trusting it as face-to-face meetings and physical journeys. This is one thing, but I am using the advantages of the virtual world and the digital world. There is another question about the recordings. Yes. The recordings will be available very soon on a channel called Turjuman, and I will share it on my Facebook page. The time the videos and the audios are uploaded. Reem Hassan, I totally agree with you. Yes, I put an emphasis on conference and simultaneous interpreting or booth interpreting more, but this applies also to community interpreters and interpreting in social settings. And I myself, I served so many events for the refugees in Greece, and I interviewed even some refugees about their journeys, treacherous journeys, and I have a talk online on YouTube on that, and how the interpreter is a human being after all, and for the people in distress, he is the savior. Now, with regard to the comment put forward by Dina Kapene, I agree with you to some extent, Dina. It depends also on the setting and the mode of interpreting. If it is simultaneous, I agree with you. But if it is community interpreting, you cannot do without putting something from yourself. You are a human being. If you are seeing somebody sinking or injured, you will act as a human being, not as an interpreter. Or you can, if you are, for example, interpreting a medical meeting, for example, in a refugee camp, and the person, the refugee who is sick, needs to have a prescription very quickly. So here you have to remove the hat of the interpreter or the so-called professional, and I'm not an advisor, to act as a human being. Now, so it depends on the setting, of course, and the mode of interpreting. Ula, the identity loss, yes, I agree with you, because I would like to say that I'm still novice and I'm still learning. And one of the learning points I am focusing on now is on my identity, my status as an interpreter. That's why I always rush to have an encounter with my mother for my identity, to have my identity, long-standing identity, confirmed and valued. And more than that, identity, as I mentioned in my talk, is not only the core and the beginning of the self, but also it can be acquired and colored by experience. So, but it is also a matter of how much balance you can strike between what you learn and what you see, you can accommodate, but then also what you are and your roots. And here I don't like, you can quote the Mahatma Gandhi, who has a very famous saying on that, and this applies to interpreters as well. So with that, I think we have covered all of the questions. Haven't
Time
we?
to say goodbye.
Yes. So over to you, Professor House, for 1 minute to
thank
say.
you very much for this fantastic and very, how shall I put it, very touching conference. It was very, very good. Thanks to you, Hammouda, with your personal experience and your wisdom. Thank you very much. And thank all the participants for asking questions, for being there and looking so beautiful over the screen here. All of us, even Sami.
Even Sami. Though today he's setting his own
modest appearance.
I'm in my living room. So everyone knows my living room right now.
I'm in my kitchen here, as you can see. Look at the blackboard.
Professor
okay,
House,
thank you very much.
Would you allow me to ask a final question? Hammouda,
Yes, do.
is this the last Zoom meeting we have?
Hammouda organizes this.
Exactly, because we don't know.
Yes, this is the last for the first round.
All right.
There will be a second round, and we have two speakers confirmed.
All right.
Who are Professor Christian Nord, and by the way, we postponed her talk because she lost her husband, and I informed Professor House, and
I phoned her up and I gave my condolences. I know her very well. Yeah.
Yes, and the second speaker is the great Noam Chomsky. He confirmed, but
he confirmed. Excellent.
Yes, no, he confirmed. But this is the second round, and
not forget the invitation.
Yeah, of course, and but for the first round, this is the last of the encounters on the shores of translation.
So, let me play the troublemaker, invite everyone to unmute their microphones and do a very loud round of applause. Thank you.
Thank you. And good
Thank you
night.
all,
Night.
ladies and gentlemen, dear friends, students, colleagues.
معلش حمودة عندي اقتراح من فضلك قبل ما نغادر الغرفة. يا ريت يكون في بعض المحاضرات. Sorry, I speak in
English, yes.
in Arabic, yes, in English. If you please, we need some presentations in French and in Arabic also, not only in English.
The suggestion is really very relevant, and I have taken note of your suggestion. Thank you very much.
Bilingual. Okay, thank you so much.
Thank you very much.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Take care.
Bye-bye.
But again, last note, Professor House.
What?
The inspirational setting or mood is contagious, and I do believe in the encounters, and people cannot do well in a setting that does not encourage them to do that. So it is thanks to you all that you made really very active participation and contribution to these encounters. I would like to thank you all very much for what you have done. Thank you and bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Never forget your
Thank you very much.
Shashia.
Thank you.
Bye.
Good night. Thank you.
Thank you.
Good night.